right. Hello. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Now, June is, of course, LGBTQ Pride Month, and in a perplexing twist, certain segments of the LGBT community have aligned themselves with Islamist terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, despite these Islamist groups' brutal persecution of individuals from the LGBT community. From pride parades chanting queers for Hamas or slogans like gays, some activists championing pro-Palestinian causes while ignoring the imprisonment, torture, and execution of LGBT communities in the territories that are governed by these Islamist groups. In Gaza, Hamas enforces strict anti-LGBTQ doctrines rooted in ideologies that deem homosexuality as a sin punishable by death. We have cases of Palestinian refugees like Ahmad Abu Murkhiyeh, who was a gay man who was decapitated after seeking asylum in Israel, which highlight the deadly consequences for being a member of the LGBT community in these parts of the world. Now, why are parts of the LGBT community embracing groups that oppose their very existence? And what are the risks of this paradoxical alliance? Joining us today to discuss all this is Mr. Yuval David, who is Emmy Award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and actor, as well as a prominent advocate for Jewish and LGBTQ rights. He also serves as a strategic advisor to international NGOs, policy institutes, and advocacy organizations, bringing expertise in media, communications, and socio-political analysis. His commentary appears across leading global news networks and publications, and he has appeared on a number of TV stations across the world. Of course, he is also very active on social media, and you can find his work across X, Instagram, YouTube, and elsewhere. Now, with that, I will welcome Yuval David. Very good to see you, and thanks for joining us today.
It's good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, we're very much looking forward to your insights here. Now, I'll begin. You have written a couple of articles recently in the Middle East Forum's Observer publication about this topic. Mind maybe giving us a sort of overview of everything that's kind of happening these days with regards to the LGBT community and its dangerous love affair with these Islamist organizations?
Wow. Yes, it's a very heavy and complicated, mind-twisting topic. We just had World Pride here in Washington, D.C., where I actually marched with the Jewish groups during the Pride March, during the Pride Parade. And from what we all saw, I was the only person who marched with a Jewish a pride flag with a Magen David. I'm also the only person who brought an Israeli pride flag to the march, as much as I and the rest of my group saw. I think that's embarrassing, and it's terrible that not only did we not have more representation of Jews within a community that includes Jews, because we know that so many Jews were actually afraid to show up due to terrorist attacks and incidents and physical violence that's happened against Jews here in the United States, but also due to the ever increasing anti-Semitism masked as anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiments within the LGBTQ community. Um, Look, I have to just say, as a proud member of the LGBT community and a staunch advocate for human rights, I find it so deeply troubling to witness these segments of our community who are aligning themselves with Islamist terrorist organizations like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, and other affiliated organizations. This alliance isn't only paradoxical, but it's perilous, especially given these groups' documented persecutions of LGBTQIA plus individuals. So to try to unpackage and understand how LGBT people are supporting Islamist terror groups requires an understanding of the mind twisting propaganda, misinformation, and purposeful disinformation that the LGBT movement and the greater progressive movement has received over the course of many years.
Now, that's a good segue into this next question I was going to ask you. I watched the video of you at the DC Pride celebration, and yeah, I noticed you and your entire group had attendees. They saw your Star of David, and they started yelling "Free Palestine" at you and your group. And maybe you were about to touch on this here, but at what point do you think that their cause has kind of moved away from the so-called Free Palestine cause and kind of drifted into straight up anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Well, the rhetoric of anti-Zionism and anti-Israel has masked the sentiments and the beliefs that are truly anti-Jewish. That's been so normalized that now people can actually talk about Jews openly in a way that maybe wasn't as socially acceptable. Now it is socially acceptable to exclude Jews, to say that Jews aren't diverse enough, that Jews within the binary type of thinking of oppressor versus oppressed, or in the victimhood competitions that we're seeing, it seems like those people are not wanting to accept that Jews can actually be oppressed, that Jews can actually be victims, because they think about Jews with these ancient tropes, these old tropes that Jews must be more successful, that, like we've seen the tropes throughout the 1900s that have resurfaced again. Jews run the banks, Jews run the governments, Jews own all the media, Jews are wealthy. They're now condemning us with those same tropes. Meanwhile, Jews are being targeted. We are being victimized. We are being killed outside of our museums. We are having firebombs thrown at us at our gatherings in Colorado. We do have an increase of security at every synagogue, every Jewish school. Jewish businesses have security. Jewish people who openly support Israel or who openly share their pride are being targeted and victimized, all in the name of anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiments by these groups. We're seeing it from the far left. We've also seen it for a very long time from the far right. So we need to call it out.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one thing I've noticed in my own personal experience is that when you try to address some of these concerns about the incompatibility with the Palestinian movement and Islamist groups with the LGBT movement, one thing you will get in response is they will say that you are, quote, pinkwashing
Right.
the conflict or pinkwashing the so-called genocide or what have you. What do you make of that, and how would you respond to these claims?
Well, time and time again, I have been accused of being a pinkwasher. There are even times where groups would protest outside of speeches that I would give, or workshops that I would lead, or places that I was presenting advocacy content, and there would be signs that would say Yuval David #1 pinkwasher. So just so you know, you're actually on this on this chat here with an actual pink washer. Hello, thank you. I should have worn pink. I'd actually quickly changed my shirt to a pink shirt. Maybe I need to start doing that. Um, the movements that are against us. Actually, before I even get to that, civil rights, social justice, and human rights movements have understood the importance of language. The movements that are against us, us being Jews or supporters of Israel or supporters of democracy or supporters of the constitutional republic, like what we have here in the United States, understand the use and manipulation of language and placard strategy in order to condemn those that they are against. They're using language like pinkwashing to condemn us because people say, well, what is that? What does that mean? What does pinkwashing mean? It's a term that they define as people like me using my LGBT identity or my LGBT activism to cover up the sins of the Jewish people or of Israel. That's what pinkwashing means. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it represents their own bigotry, believing that I must not be able to have my own intersectional identity. another piece of verbiage that they use a lot to celebrate your intersectional identity, how you're part of so many different communities. Well, they claim that it is unacceptable for LGBT people to also be Zionist, to also support Israel, and apparently now, as we're seeing, to even be Jewish.
Now, there of course is this group of LGBT activists and members of the community who are, uh, catering to and siding with these Islamists and terrorist-leaning organizations. To your knowledge, as somebody very active inside of these LGBT communities, are there any that seek to empower and to help the people in Muslim communities who are LGBT and who are being repressed by their Islamist governments and their societies?
You think we would see more of that, which makes me call out, dare I just openly say, BS on a lot of these international LGBT organizations that aren't actually helping the LGBT people internationally who desperately need help. Yes, there's the Rainbow Railroad, there's Dignity LGBTQI, there's the Freedom House, organizations that all have a presence in North America that try to help LGBT people internationally. Those are really small organizations. Most of the LGBT organizations within democracies, within Western nations, are just celebrating pride within those countries, meanwhile, forgetting that we have an international LGBT community. So, if we're really about helping each other, then we need to help those people who are in need. I happen to be one of those people who help people in need. I've collaborated with the organizations I just listed. I engage in all different types of advocacy and truly trying to save lives of LGBT people in countries that practice Sharia law, where being LGBT, or as they just see it as homosexual or different, is condemned and punishable with rape, with being forced into prostitution, with imprisonment, and with being killed. So, what we're seeing within this LGBTQ community, I mean, the only way I can describe it is that I guess if irony were fatal, this progressive West, which includes our LGBT movement, it would have collapsed long ago under the weight of its own contradictions. But, here we are. We're watching drag queens waving flags for Hamas. We're seeing LGBTQ plus collectives chanting slogans written by men who would execute them, and Ivy League professors decrying colonialism while excluding jihadist regimes whose entire foundation is conquest, misogyny, and genocide. So, how do I define it? It's not just moral collapse, it's a pandemic. It's an ideological virus that's spreading from campuses to Congress, from Hollywood to human rights organizations. So, maybe we need to call it a jihad pandemic because it's infecting the very people it would ultimately destroy.
Now, maybe this is just an observation, speculation, but do you think it's the case that we hear so little about persecuted LGBT communities inside of the Muslim world? Because here in the West, anytime anyone tries to bring up these issues, they are dismissed as being Islamophobic or cultural, displaying cultural superiority and trying to infringe on their culture and their religion and their way of life when really, I mean, these people are suffering. These people are being persecuted. How do we bridge that gap and how do we let these people know of what's really happening and that there's nothing Islamic about it?
Correct. So to keep letting them know about it is the how. We need to keep talking about it and advocating for those who need help. There was a very brief blip in time when people were in the West, and especially here in America where I live, where people were focused on, for example, women's rights in Iran, and even less so on LGBT rights in Iran. But as we heard, I can't remember how many years ago, when Ahmadinejad said that there are no homosexuals in Iran, that Iran doesn't have a single homosexual, right? They're practicing erasure of LGBT people in their words, but also in their actions of how they punish homosexuality by death, which is how it's written in the Quran, Hadith, and throughout Islamic law. So, how do we help the LGBT people who are in need of life-saving. Their lives need to be saved. We need to reach out to our elected officials in whichever country we exist in, hopefully in a democratic nation, to say we need to help these people or speak out about these things. Because so many political leaders, no matter in which democratic nation they exist, they also comment about international issues and global issues. This is a global issue that needs to be addressed. The LGBT community, as you just said, if somebody talks about what is happening to LGBT people in Muslim countries, they're met with some sort of resistance to actually speaking about it. I don't understand why LGBT people are practicing erasure of our own LGBT people who need help. The only way to understand it is the many decades long infiltration of Islamist groups within progressive movements, including the LGBT movement.
Now, you brought up something in your remarks there, and you also brought up something earlier about intersectionality, so to speak. Uh, you mentioned the movements that happened a few years ago for women's rights in Iran, the Women Life Freedom movement. I think you're referring to after the murder of Mahsa Amini in Iran. Now, what's interesting is when that was going on, many of these activists who were marching in the streets for women's rights in Iran, we now find years later are marching for the Palestinian cause and not knowing about the Iranian connection and the Islamist factor in all of this. How much of how much of this movement do you think is simply that people following trends versus people who genuinely are falling into this red-green alliance trap and really going down a dark and dangerous road of anti-Semitism?
I definitely think that it's we're seeing a lot of people who are following the trend, who are following what is being shared and said on social media, where I can't remember what the statistic is. More than 95% of people under the age of 45 internationally receive their world news and information from TikTok and Instagram. So whatever the algorithm is sharing, that's what they're going to see. So the Islamist groups understood that they need to shift the algorithm in their favor of how to disseminate information. Uh, the unholy union that's been documented extensively, this red-green alliance, shows how far left movements have found this ideological camaraderie with Islamic fundamentalists bound by shared enemies. The West, liberal democracy, and especially Israel, what unites these very odd bedfellows, let's call it that, it's not about love, it's about hate. And that hate is directed towards Jews, towards the United States, towards Israel. And somehow people who are waving rainbow flags are marching in solidarity with those who burn them. This this irony couldn't be thicker than the eyeliner at a Tel Aviv Pride after party. I mean, progressive LGBTQ plus organizations across the US have voiced support for free Palestine, many even post October 7th in the days and weeks right after October 7th, 2023, after Hamas raped, butchered, and burned civilians alive in Israel. It's not solidarity, it's self erasure. I mean, we've seen multiple American imams praising October 7th and the Hamas massacre in sermons across US mosques, some funded or protected by so-called progressive institutions. These include horrifying calls for global jihad and extermination of Jews, delivered from pulpits such as in Michigan, in New York, in Texas. So we're hearing the hate speech and people are protecting it as free speech because when the Jews are attacked as part of this hate speech, then people really rise up to protect it. But if that hate speech was about Black people or immigrants or Muslim people or LGBT people, it would be swiftly condemned. So we're seeing the use and manipulation of triggering language to affect and change and manipulate the feeble minds of useful idiots.
Yeah, very well stated. Now, in my experience last year here in Denver, Colorado, there was a pride parade. And as I was watching, there was a section of it that was, of course, this Free Palestine section. They're waving Palestinian flags, and they were met with kind of mixed reception. There was some number of people who, were cheering them on and chanting Free Palestine with them. But it seemed to me there was also a very sizable proportion of people who just didn't want anything to do with them and who, as far as the vibe I got, it seems like they felt like the Palestine movement was kind of hijacking their pride celebration. How would you break down the sentiments from inside the LGBT community about how they feel about this little Palestine faction within it?
Well, the Palestinianism, which is a Trojan horse for Islamism, for the spreading of Islamic fundamentalism, has been in the LGBTQ space and appeared within the LGBTQ space for a long time. I've witnessed it for many years. I mean, even as early as 2016, I started to see it very vibrantly, especially as this queers for Palestine and then queers for Hamas and now gays for Gaza and all of these different groups. We've seen it there for a long time. So how can I unpackage that? It's because these Islamist organizations understood how to utilize the language of the LGBTQ movement and of progressive civil rights and social justice movements. For example, I heard people cheering, "We are all Palestinian," as of 2018 and 2019. Definitely as of October 2023, after October 7th. I already started to hear it even more. We are all Palestinian. Queer rights are Palestinian rights, and Palestinian rights are queer rights. All of this sloganeering and placard strategy approaches, especially if something rhymes, then these people believe that it must be true. That's what I was hearing again and again and again. And people were handing out free kafiyas at conferences, at LGBT conferences, when, you'd get a book or an iPhone cover or a mug or, a little gift bag of whatever. These Islamist movements were handing out kafiyas saying that the kafiya is a symbol of resistance against any form of oppression. So how did that work? They taught people slogans. They added actual imagery and things that would make LGBT people who don't have a lot of information about Middle Eastern affairs to feel represented and to feel like they resonate within the plight of the Palestinians. Now, in contrast, there are a lot of people who don't support this Palestinianism and the Islamism movement, but they're so afraid to speak up because they're afraid to be canceled. Cancel culture is still a thing. They still want to be part of the LGBTQ community because they don't feel as comfortable within non-LGBTQ spaces, or they just want to be within a space that welcomes them for who they are, for how they are, for how they love, and what their identity is. So they try not to speak about certain issues. That is self-erasure in order to be able to exist openly. Some of those people eventually become capos and end up doing things against other people who actually share their beliefs. So we're seeing this horrendous situation that's been happening for far too long. I regularly get contacted on social media, or people who come to my speaking engagements and events, or even people who approach me at a pride march like what we just had in DC and say, "Thank you so much for coming here and for representing Jews and representing Israel and representing Zionism and representing the true values." And they'll say things like, "I'm an old school lesbian or an old school gay or an old school, bi or trans or whatever it is." And what happened to our movement? And thank you, Yuval, for doing all this stuff. I say, don't just thank me, join me. Don't just thank me, participate with me. I should not be so alone. I'm going to say this again. During World Pride in Washington, D.C., I was the only person my group could see who was there with a Jewish pride flag. I also brought an Israeli pride flag for some of my friends to hold. Those were the only Jewish and Israeli pride flags that I saw during World Pride, which is a massive event. So Jews, allies, show up.
Absolutely. And of course, what you're doing, it is a thankless deed. I wish more people would stand behind you. Now, we are reaching the end here. If you have time, I'd like to just ask one more question. Um, of course, to you and I, it seems, this would otherwise be a pretty comical issue, the whole gays for Palestine thing. I've heard some people call, liken it to chickens for KFC.
Oh
But of
God, please
course,
don't use it. Everybody uses that same joke again and again and again and again and again. I've spoken to you so many times. I want you to hear a better slogan or joke from you. But I think what would be more fitting instead of queers for Palestine is like, chickens for KFC is something like black people for the KKK. I think that
absolutely.
makes much more sense, and it's about people, not about chickens and a restaurant. But if you want to give them slogans, how about free Palestine, enslave yourself, or left of center, right into Sharia, or intersectional until they stone you at the crossroads, or rebel without a clue, kneeling for the knife, or lattes, lectures, and lapdogs for terror. Uh, Allies to executioners, that's not a vibe. I don't know. We can come up with so many better things to use the
Sure.
same placard strategy approach to maybe wake up the useful idiots to actual facts.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And of course, putting
Sorry
aside
if I
the
yucked your yum
no, no, no.
joke,
I'm
but
glad.
I'm
I'm glad
tired
you
of that
did. I
joke.
will. I will come up with something more original next time we
I just
speak.
gave you some pretty good options, by the way. I have more. I'm workshopping them.
But aside from the kind of comical nature of this on the surface, of course, we've seen in recent weeks what what this red-green alliance can lead to. It leads to two people being shot in DC. It leads here in Colorado to Jews being firebombed by people in both cases who had the door held open for them by these progressive movements. What can we do in the eyes of the modern LGBT pro-Palestine factions to tell them, look, this is what you get when you start chanting to globalize the Intifada?
You're asking me how we can change their minds? You can ask me, what are you asking me? How we can show them facts? What are you asking?
I guess maybe I answered my own question there, but are they really aware of what they are bringing in with these Trojan horses? And is there a way to really get it into their minds?
Well, I think showing them more facts, sharing real facts. The thing is, most people don't want facts, they just want emotions. Most people prefer to be ignorant and useful idiots because most people won't read a book, right? Most people won't read an entire article. Most people will only watch the first 30 seconds of a video on social media. So, what do we need to do? We need to share more information. We need to be more active on social media. And the people who say, oh, I'm too old for social media, my response to them is, you are part of the problem. We know that the world has progressed. Sorry, most people don't read a newspaper in paper print anymore. They don't receive it at the bottom of their driveway anymore. So get with it. If you are in this battle, then join the battle of sharing information. Go onto your social media 5 minutes a day, or maybe 5 minutes a week, or 5 minutes a month, and go onto the accounts, for example, of the Middle East Forum, or of the Log Cabin Republicans, or for me, Yuval David, or Honest Reporting, or Stand With Us, or all of these many different organizations, the ADL. I can keep listing all of these different organizations and news sources, and click like, comment, say something there, share it. What does that do? That makes you part of the algorithm that is sharing information that needs to be shared. That is what we all need to do. Because when we try to understand how these useful idiots became useful idiots, it's because we are losing the battle in which the Islamist movements are engaging in purposeful disinformation and misinformation propaganda. Do you know what? If all I saw were that Jews are horrible and Jews run the governments, the banks, the media, that Jews purposefully kill babies, and that is Israel is a white supremacist apartheid state, and erases the fact that 23% of Israelis are Arab Muslim, and that the vast majority of Jewish Israelis are actually considered people of color. But if I only saw all of that erasure and disinformation and didn't know anything other than that, I would believe it. We need to be part of the information sources that help educate the world and maybe just give them some emotions connected to it if that's all they want to receive.
Very well said, and I applaud your enthusiasm for what you do. I want to thank you again, Yuval. It's always great talking to you. It's very good to see you, and I've had a blast doing this podcast with you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you. I'm honored to engage with you in conversation, and you're doing incredible work. So, I mean, your audience is already tuned in, but maybe your audience should also take that next step of telling other friends of theirs to tune in, to pay attention, to follow, to like, to support Middle East Forum, and of course, follow me across social media. There aren't that many Yuval Davids out there.
Yes, and on that point, for those of us viewing and listening in the audience, where might you direct if they want to follow more of your work and follow you on socials?
So it's Yuval David, Yuvaldavid on Facebook. You'll see my page there on X, formerly Twitter, on YouTube. It's the same. On Instagram, though, I'm Yuval underscore David underscore. But even if you just search for my name, you'll find it. You can find me all across social media where I share information, share educational videos, and then, of course, all of the articles that I write and news commentary and international news every week. So I'm doing my best. Join me. Don't just follow me. Join me.
Very well said. Now, for our viewers and listeners, I want to thank you again for your viewership. As always, we appreciate your support, and I would like to invite you to check your email inboxes over the weekend to follow our upcoming podcasts for the next week. I hope to see you all there, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.